The Phantom Patrol. In the quaint town of Ravenswood, nestled deep within the forested hills, there was an old, abandoned house that had long been the subject of local legends. The house, known as the Blackwood Manor, had been empty for decades, its windows shattered, and its walls covered in ivy. Despite its dilapidated state, the manor had an eerie presence that sent shivers down the spines of those who dared to venture near. The local police department had received numerous distress calls from the manor over the years. Each time, officers would arrive to find the house empty and silent, with no signs of any disturbance. The calls were always the same: whispers of voices, footsteps echoing through the halls, and the faint sound of a woman crying. The townspeople believed the house was haunted, and many claimed to have seen ghostly figures wandering the grounds at night. One autumn evening, Officer James Carter, a seasoned member of the Ravenswood Police Department, was assigned to investigate the latest in a series of distress calls from the manor. Carter was a skeptic by nature, dismissing the tales of hauntings as mere superstition. Determined to put an end to the rumors once and for all, he decided to spend the night at the manor. As the sun set and darkness enveloped the town, Carter arrived at the Blackwood Manor. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the wind. He parked his patrol car at the edge of the overgrown driveway and made his way to the front door, his flashlight casting long shadows on the crumbling facade. Inside, the manor was a labyrinth of decaying rooms and corridors, each one more foreboding than the last. Carter set up his equipment in the grand foyer, a once opulent space now filled with dust and cobwebs. He placed his radio on a nearby table and settled into an old armchair, ready to document any unusual occurrences. Hours passed, and the manor remained eerily quiet. Carter's skepticism grew, and he began to believe that the stories were nothing more than the product of overactive imaginations. Just as he was about to call it a night, he heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. He strained to listen, his heart pounding in his chest. The whisper grew louder, evolving into a chorus of voices, each one overlapping the other. Carter's flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light across the room. He stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for his radio, but it was dead. No signal, no power. The whispers seemed to be coming from the hallway, drawing him deeper into the heart of the manor. With each step, the air grew colder and the voices more distinct. Carter could make out fragments of conversations, pleas for help, and anguished cries. He followed the sound to a door at the end of the hallway, its surface marred by deep scratches. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was a library, its shelves lined with dusty books and faded photographs. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, its surface covered in a thick layer of grime. As Carter approached the mirror, he felt a sudden chill, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees. He wiped away the grime with his sleeve, revealing his reflection, and something else. Behind him, in the mirror's reflection, stood a woman in a tattered dress, her eyes hollow and her face twisted in sorrow. Carter spun around, but the room was empty. He turned back to the mirror, and the woman was still there, her gaze fixed on him. She raised her hand, pointing to a book on the shelf behind him. Carter hesitated, his mind racing with questions. Who was this woman? What did she want? He reached for the book, its cover worn and its pages yellowed with age. As he opened it, a piece of paper fell out, fluttering to the floor. He picked it up and read the faded handwriting. To those who find this, know that the Blackwood Manor is cursed. The spirits of the past cannot rest, and they seek vengeance for the wrongs done to them. Leave this place, or suffer their wrath. Carter's blood ran cold. He looked back at the mirror, but the woman was gone. The whispers had returned, louder and more insistent. He felt a presence behind him, and the air grew heavy with a sense of impending doom. He turned to leave, but the door slammed shut, trapping him inside. Panic set in as the room grew darker, the shadows closing in around him. The whispers became screams, and the temperature plummeted. Carter's flashlight flickered and died, leaving him in complete darkness. He fumbled for his radio, but it was still dead. Desperation took hold, and he began to pound on the door, shouting for help. Suddenly, the room fell silent. The air was still, and the oppressive weight lifted. Carter turned to face the mirror, and there she was, the woman, her eyes filled with sorrow and anger. She stepped out of the mirror, her form becoming solid and real. She reached out to him, her touch icy cold. "Help us," she whispered, her voice filled with pain. "Free us from this curse." Carter's mind raced as he tried to comprehend what was happening. He knew he had to find a way to break the curse and release the spirits trapped within the manor. He remembered the book and the warning it contained. There had to be a way to undo the wrongs of the past. He searched the library, looking for any clues that might help him. He found an old journal, its pages filled with the writings of the manor's previous owner, a man named Jonathan Blackwood. The journal detailed the dark history of the house, the tragedies that had befallen its inhabitants, and the rituals that had been performed to bind their spirits. Carter realized that the only way to free the spirits was to perform a counter-ritual, one that would break the bonds that held them captive. He gathered the necessary items, candles, herbs, and a ceremonial dagger, and prepared to perform the ritual. As he began, the room grew colder, and the whispers returned, urging him on. The ritual was long and arduous, but Carter persevered. He chanted the incantations, his voice steady, despite the fear that gripped him. As he completed the final step, a blinding light filled the room, and the spirits of the manor were released. The woman smiled, her form fading into the light. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "We are free." The light faded, and the room returned to its normal state. Carter felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had done it. He had freed the spirits and broken the curse. He left the manor, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon. As he drove back to the police station, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at what he had experienced. The Blackwood Manor was no longer haunted, and the town of Ravenswood could finally rest easy. But Carter knew that he would never forget the night he spent in the manor, and the spirits he had helped to free. The Vanishing Officer. In the heart of the dense, fog-covered forests of Ravenswood, there was a stretch of highway known for its eerie reputation. This particular stretch, known as the Phantom Highway, had been the site of numerous mysterious disappearances over the years. Locals whispered tales of ghostly apparitions and strange occurrences, but no one could explain the true nature of the highway's dark secrets. Officer Daniel Hayes, a rookie cop fresh out of the academy, was assigned to patrol the Phantom Highway. Despite the warnings from his colleagues, Hayes was eager to prove himself and dismissed the stories as mere superstition. He believed that the disappearances were the result of natural causes or human foul play, not supernatural forces. One foggy night, as Hayes drove along the desolate highway, he noticed a figure standing in the middle of the road. The figure was shrouded in mist, barely visible in the dim light of his patrol car's headlights. Hayes slowed down and rolled down his window, calling out to the figure. There was no response. He stepped out of the car, his hand resting on his holstered weapon, and approached cautiously. As he got closer, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving Hayes bewildered. He returned to his car, only to find that it wouldn't start. The engine was dead, and his radio was filled with static. Frustrated and unnerved, Hayes decided to walk back to the nearest town to get help. As he walked, the fog grew thicker and the air grew colder. Hayes felt a growing sense of unease, as if he were being watched. He heard footsteps behind him, but when he turned around, there was no one there. The sound of whispers filled the air, and he could make out fragments of conversations, pleas for help, and anguished cries. Suddenly, his radio crackled to life, and he heard a voice saying, "You shouldn't be here." The voice was distorted and filled with static, but it was clear enough to send a chill down Hayes' spine. He quickened his pace, his heart pounding in his chest. As he neared a bend in the road, he saw a faint light in the distance. Hopeful that it was a passing car, he waved his arms and shouted for help. The light grew brighter, but as it approached, Hayes realized it wasn't a car. It was a ghostly figure, glowing with an otherworldly light. The figure stopped in front of him, and Hayes could see that it was a man in an old-fashioned police uniform. The ghostly officer's eyes were hollow, and his face was twisted in sorrow. He reached out to Hayes, his hand passing through the air like mist. "Help us," the ghostly officer whispered. "We are trapped here, unable to move on. You must find a way to free us." Hayes was frozen in fear, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. The ghostly officer pointed to a nearby tree, where a weathered sign was barely visible through the fog. The sign read, "In memory of the fallen officers of Ravenswood." Realization dawned on Hayes. The disappearances were not the work of human hands, but the restless spirits of officers who had died on the Phantom Highway. Determined to help them find peace, Hayes vowed to uncover the truth and break the curse that bound them to the highway. He spent the next few days researching the history of the highway and the officers who had died there. He discovered that the highway had been the site of a tragic accident many years ago, in which several officers had lost their lives while responding to a call. Their spirits had been trapped, unable to move on due to the unresolved nature of their deaths. Hayes returned to the highway with a plan. He set up a makeshift memorial at the site of the accident, placing flowers and lighting candles in honor of the fallen officers. He recited a prayer, asking for their forgiveness and hoping to bring them peace. As he finished, the fog began to lift, and the air grew warmer. The ghostly figures appeared once more, their faces now serene and at peace. The ghostly officer who had first appeared to Hayes stepped forward, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "We can finally rest." With that, the ghostly figures faded into the light, and the highway was no longer haunted. Hayes returned to the police station, his heart filled with a sense of accomplishment. He had not only proven himself as a capable officer, but had also brought peace to the restless spirits of the Phantom Highway. The story of Officer Daniel Hayes and the vanishing officer became a legend in Ravenswood, a tale of bravery and compassion that would be told for generations to come. And the Phantom Highway, once a place of fear and mystery, was now a symbol of hope and redemption. The Haunted Jail Cell. In the heart of Ravenswood, there stood an old police station that had seen better days. The building, with its cracked walls and creaky floors, was a relic of a bygone era. Among the officers, there was one cell that no one wanted to use, Cell 13. It was said to be haunted, and the stories surrounding it were enough to send chills down anyone's spine. Prisoners who were placed in Cell 13 would often scream about seeing a shadowy figure and hearing whispers in the dead of night. The tales were so persistent that even the most hardened criminals would beg to be moved to another cell. The officers, too, were wary of the cell, and it was only used when absolutely necessary. One night, Officer Sarah Mitchell, a skeptic who dismissed the ghost stories as mere superstition, decided to spend the night in Cell 13 to prove that there was nothing to fear. Armed with a flashlight and a notebook, she settled into the cell, determined to document any unusual occurrences. As the night wore on, the station grew quiet, and the only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the occasional creak of the old building. Sarah sat on the narrow cot, her flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. Hours passed, and nothing happened. She began to feel a sense of relief, convinced that the stories were just that, stories. Just as she was about to call it a night, she heard it. A faint whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. She strained to listen, her heart pounding in her chest. The whisper grew louder, evolving into a chorus of voices, each one overlapping the other. Sarah's flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light across the room. She stood up, her hand instinctively reaching for her radio, but it was dead. No signal, no power. The whispers seemed to be coming from the corner of the cell, drawing her attention to a dark shadow that seemed to move on its own. She took a step closer, her breath catching in her throat. The shadowy figure took shape, becoming more distinct. It was a man, his face twisted in anguish, his eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. He reached out to her, his hand passing through the air like mist. "Help me," he whispered, his voice filled with pain. "I cannot rest." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to comprehend what she was seeing. She knew she had to find a way to help the restless spirit. She remembered the stories of prisoners who had died in the cell, their deaths shrouded in mystery and tragedy. Determined to uncover the truth, she began to investigate the history of Cell 13. She discovered that the cell had once held a man named Thomas Blackwood, who had been wrongfully accused of a crime he didn't commit. He had died in the cell, his spirit unable to move on due to the injustice he had suffered. Sarah knew that the only way to free him was to clear his name and bring the truth to light. With the help of her colleagues, she dug through old case files and uncovered evidence that proved Thomas's innocence. She presented the evidence to the authorities, and Thomas's name was finally cleared. That night, she returned to Cell 13, hoping to see the spirit one last time. As she entered the cell, the air grew colder and the whispers returned. The shadowy figure appeared once more, but this time, his face was serene, and his eyes were filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. "I can finally rest." With that, the figure faded into the light, and the cell was no longer haunted. Sarah left the station, her heart filled with a sense of accomplishment. She had not only proven herself as a capable officer, but had also brought peace to a restless spirit. The story of Officer Sarah Mitchell and the haunted jail cell became a legend in Ravenswood, a tale of bravery and compassion that would be told for generations to come. And Cell 13, once a place of fear and mystery, was now a symbol of hope and redemption.